Quick story about Joseph in the Bible. All right. Joseph was the favorite of his father. But guess what? Joseph had a dream. And so his brothers became jealous of him because of that dream. And so because they was jealous of him, they sold Joseph. They threw him in the pit and they sold him. And so they went back, they told their dad that he had been eaten by a wild beast. Okay, so somebody came around, some people came around, and took Joseph out the pit. And what they did was they sold Joseph into slavery. And Joseph was working in the house of the king of Potiphar, of the ruler, and he was falsely accused of rape by the wife. So he was thrown in prison. While in prison, God gave him a dream. And, he gave him the interpretation of Pharaoh's dream. Pharaoh had the dream. Joseph interpreted the dream through the Holy Spirit. So when he interpreted this dream, Pharaoh was like, wow, I'm putting you in charge. There's no one greater in this kingdom besides me. So Joseph became second in charge. See how God turned that bad into good? What his brothers thought was bad, God turned it around for Joseph and it became good. And Joseph became, I'll say, like vice president. He was in charge. No one was greater in the land besides Pharaoh. So what happens is there's a famine in the land. There's no food. There's a Great Depression. And these same brothers that sold Joseph and throw him into the pit and basically left him for dead, these same brothers had to come before him and ask for food, provision, the things they needed while they was going through this drought, this famine, this inflation or whatever it was. So in the end, Joseph did give it to them. And a couple of times, and not only that, he said, bring your father, your younger brother. And he moved them to Egypt. He didn't keep the blessing to himself. He was not like a crab in a bucket. He was winning, so he wanted his people to win too. So he brought them to Egypt. And they had their own land to do sheep, to shepherd. Not only that, the Pharaoh said, well, I'm going to give them a job too. They can be over my sheep. So they had a position in the kingdom too. But guess what? Things change. And what was a blessing to our ancestors might not be necessarily be a blessing to us. So the things that changed is that David, everybody, they were deceased by now. And now the old Potiphar, the old king, the old ruler, he had died as well. And when he died, there was a new person in charge. And this new ruler, this new king, this new Pharaoh in charge, for some reason, he didn't like the children of Israel. And what he did is he put them in bondage. He put them in made them slaves and made them work hard, harder than they had ever had to work. Unnecessarily hard. He wanted them not to be comfortable. And not only that, to add insult to injury, he made a decree, a demand, a command that all of the children to be born that were boys were to be murdered. But because of the midwives, the people who delivered the babies, they feared God, they would not do this. But this time it was Moses came along. Moses was one of the babies that was saved when the Hebrew babies were being murdered. So when Moses came along, it was time to go. Sometimes God will put you in situations when it's time for you to go. When there's time for change, we can stay in the same situation comfortably for the rest of our life and not change. And if we're not changing, We're living comfortable. We have everything we need. And we're taking for granted this is how my life is going to be. But when God has purpose for your life, sometimes he got to move you when you are comfortable, when you don't want to be moved, because you won't grow. You won't go to the next level unless he stir up the pot, unless he stir things up for you. When it's time for change, if you want change, then he'll send the change. When it's time to move, if you won't move, then he'll give you a reason to move. And that's what he did with the children of Israel. It was time for them to leave Egypt. Okay, it was time for them to get out of bondage. It was time for them to no longer be slaves and work for someone else. It was time for a new day. So it was time for a promised land, for their promise. And so that's what they did. They left Egypt and they headed to their promised land. And there were complications and delays and setbacks on their journey to their promised land. But guess what? This was only to make them stronger, and not only to make them stronger as people, to make them stronger as a community and to draw them closer, most of all, to God, and to learn to totally depend on him and to trust in him. And guess what? They made it to that promised land. They're no longer slaves. And God was with them all the way. He fed them in the desert. You know, he gave them, why their shoes and their clothes didn't wear out. He gave them everything they needed in that desert. So when God is in it, and when he changes and shakes things up and tells you it's time to go, he's going to provide for you until you get to that promised land. And I am a witness. God bless.